Welcome back to The Other Opinion, everybody. We are diving right into a story, a developing story, that really demands our attention. We're talking about the attack and then the arrest of Hamdan Ballal.
Right.
Now, you might recognize that name. He is the Palestinian co-director of No Other Land, that incredible documentary that just won an Oscar. And this is all happening over in the West Bank. So to break it down, we've pulled reporting from NDTV, BBC, and Al Jazeera.
Yeah, you know what's really fascinating is you start to see, as you go through these different reports, that while they all cover the same basic events, the details and the angles they choose to focus on can be pretty different.
Globally.
And that's what we're hoping to do today, is really unpack that for you guys. We want to give you a clear sense of what went down, what's the background of this whole situation, and why this matters so much, pulling directly from these sources.
And that Oscar win for No Other Land, it's not just a small detail. That film is really shining a light on a crucial issue.
Right. Absolutely. No Other Land focuses on the forced displacement of Palestinians in Massif Yatta. And if you don't know, this area was declared a restricted military zone by the Israeli army back in the 1980s.
Right.
Citing security concerns, but of course it's been a huge source of controversy, legal battles, all of that. So for this film to win an Oscar recently, it just brings a lot of attention to this ongoing situation. It's important.
Yeah. So with that in mind, let's look at what actually happened. The first we heard was from Yuval Abraham, Ballal's co-director. He posted on X saying that a group of settlers attacked Ballal in the village of Susiya.
Wow.
He reported a beating, injuries to his head, stomach, bleeding, and then he said soldiers took Ballal from an ambulance, which is a pretty disturbing claim.
Yeah, really disturbing. We also have firsthand information coming from the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. Their members have stated that they were there in Susiya, they saw this happen, and they actually filmed it as it unfolded.
Wow.
That's incredibly important, that direct observation, when trying to figure out what exactly took place.
And initially, when AFP reached out to the Israeli army, their response was basically, we're looking into it,
Right.
we're verifying information. That was kind of their initial stance.
All right, well, the BBC's report adds a bit more to this. They say the attack happened on Monday around 6 p.m. local time in Susiya.
Right.
And this is based on information from 5 Jewish American activists who were there to document any incidents like this. So, they were specifically there to watch for these things, and they saw this attack by settlers.
Right. And, while we're talking about this, if you guys are finding this helpful and you want to stay informed on stories like this, hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to The Other Opinion.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is the BBC then included a subsequent statement from the IDF, and they say 3 Palestinians and an Israeli were detained, suspected of rock hurling at security forces. So no specific mention of Hamdan Ballal, no mention of that initial report of a settler attack, or that he was taken from an ambulance. Kind of raises questions about, how this all went down, who was involved in what.
It does. It seems like we have these different accounts emerging really quickly. Al Jazeera also focuses on that post from Abraham on X, really highlighting the settler attack, Ballal's injuries, and that whole thing about him being taken from the ambulance.
Right.
So you can see that the initial information, especially from the co-director, was painting a very specific picture of what happened.
Yeah. And Al Jazeera also mentioned this video that was released by the Center for Jewish Nonviolence.
Oh.
And they say this video shows a masked settler, acting really aggressively towards activists. You can even hear rocks hitting their car. So it just gives you a sense of, that tension and the possibility of violence there at the scene.
And you know what? This is a really important story. And if you guys have any other opinions or perspectives on this developing story, we would love to hear them.
Yeah.
Drop them in the comments below.
That's what The Other Opinion is all about. We want to hear all sides.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, those same Jewish activists that were present, they also said they were attacked.
Oh, wow.
Both Al Jazeera and the BBC talk about how a group of 10 to 20 masked settlers, they say, used stones, sticks against them, smashed the car windows, even slashed their tires.
Wow.
So according to these witnesses, it wasn't just Ballal or the Palestinian community there that was targeted. The violence was directed at them too. Yeah, it's a really complicated situation. And, the IDF, again, via the BBC, said that an Israeli citizen was injured during this and needed to be taken away for medical treatment. So it just makes this even more complex. It suggests that it wasn't just a straightforward incident, maybe more chaotic than the initial reports made it seem.
Yeah.
Underscores the importance of really looking at all these different accounts. If you're following along and you appreciate these kinds of deep dives, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you don't miss future episodes of The Other Opinion.
Absolutely. To understand this, you really have to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Both NDTV and the BBC reported that Israel has occupied the West Bank since 1967.
Right.
And in this area, you have about 3 million Palestinians living alongside almost 500,000 Israelis in settlements that are considered illegal under international law.
Yeah.
So, that automatically creates tension and contributes to all of these ongoing issues.
And sadly, the BBC has also highlighted that there's been a surge in settler violence against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank ever since that Israel-Hamas war broke out back in 2023.
Right.
And this incident with Hamdan Ballal seems to really fit into that disturbing trend, unfortunately.
It does, and it's worth remembering what Al Jazeera pointed out about no other land.
Yep.
It's not just some broad commentary, it actually follows this activist, Ballal, as he's documenting the destruction of his hometown, Masa Faryada.
Right.
So for the film to win awards internationally and then the Oscar, it really highlights how important this specific area is and the struggles that the Palestinian residents are facing.
Yep.
And it's clearly a film that has really resonated with people all over the world.
It has, and it's gotten a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So here, The Other Opinion, what we've tried to do is bring together all these different reports, all these accounts. We've synthesized information from NDTV, the BBC, Al Jazeera, along with those initial reports from the people who are actually there.
Yeah.
We want to give you, the listener, the clearest possible picture of what happened to Hamdan Ballal, what's the context of all this, and why this has become such a big story.
And what's really apparent is how those initial accounts we got differ, sometimes in significant ways, from what we're hearing now.
Totally.
It really shows how challenging it can be to get an immediate and accurate picture of what's happening in an environment like this.
Yeah.
It's politically charged, it's complex. It really underlines how important it is to look at multiple sources, think about different perspectives.
And that's exactly what we're all about here at The Other Opinion.
Absolutely.
And if you guys appreciate these multiple sides to the story, consider sharing this deep dive with your friends.
Yeah, for sure.
The more people who can engage with different perspectives, the better.
And it's just amazing to me how a single event can be reported and framed in such different ways.
Yeah.
Subtly different, sometimes not so subtle, depending on the news outlet.
Yeah.
It probably reflects their sources, their editorial choices, all of that.
For sure.
But it's really fascinating to see.
And it just shows how important it is to think critically, to look at a range of sources before you form your own opinion.
Yeah.
Which is what we encourage all our listeners to do here at The Other Opinion. And if you haven't already, now's a great time to hit subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives into important stories like this.
Yeah, and this is a really good example of how even those seemingly breaking news events are often so tied to these complex historical and political realities.
Right.
You really have to dig deeper to understand what's going on.
You do. Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive. We've looked at those initial reports of the attack on Hamdan Ballal, the different accounts of what happened during his arrest, the wider context of the occupation, the increase in settler violence in the West Bank, all of that.
Yeah, and we've also talked about how important No Other Land, that Oscar-winning documentary, is, how it's brought attention to what's happening in Masa Faryada.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me how these narratives around his detention are so different. It's a really key takeaway here.
It is. So here's a thought for you guys to chew on after our discussion today. Taking everything into account, those different accounts, the broader context we've talked about, what does this incident with Hamdan Ballal really tell us about the challenges of understanding and reporting on events in this region?
Right.
What other questions come to mind for you guys? We really want to encourage you to keep exploring these issues.
Yeah, because this incident really highlights the sensitivities, the contested narratives that surround this conflict. It's really important to keep looking for information to evaluate different sources.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the attack and arrest of Hamdan Ballal here on The Other Opinion.
Absolutely.
We hope this gave you a clearer understanding of this complex and evolving situation.
We really aim to bring you a balanced view of how this is being reported across different news outlets to give you a more complete picture.
Exactly. And finally, we want to mention that this was an AI-generated deep dive that aims to provide information. We do try to be accurate, but it's possible some details might have errors.